ladies and gentlemen, what I wanted to do today was actually cover some of the best units in Wuthering Waves. And the topic of discussion, or really the scope when it comes to those best units, isn't going to be the characters that you're pulling from the gacha, but actually some of the beginner ones. Some of the highest priorities for those that maybe aren't pulling on every single banner, some higher priorities for those that are maybe free to play, or they're just testing the game out first before deciding to, go ahead and dump a bunch of money into it. And these are going to be the top 5 must-build budget characters for end game content. And so when I'm talking about end game content, it's going to be featured around 2 main modes, right? The first one being the Tower of Adversity that resets on a monthly basis and focuses on single target or slightly AoE situations. And then we're going to have over in Verina Whimpering Waste, which are going to focus a lot more on AoE, massive number of mob type of content. And so when I'm talking about these 5 characters, I really am talking about ones that aren't limited at all. And I'm going to be giving you all some build tips when it comes to echoes, rotations, all of that to make sure that you're getting the most out of these units. And so with that, why don't we just go ahead and go from the top down and take a look at who's probably the most important. And you all probably know by now, it's not actually Sanhua. It is going to be none other than Verina. And this is a unit that you're able to claim for completely free after completing the beginner missions that are available in the 2.4 update, everything beyond that. And if you were playing before 2.0, you could just select her from, well, the 5-star selector that we all had since launch. And so when it comes to this unit, there are only a few things that you need to make her work. You'll notice over here, I don't actually have her at level 90. That's because, well, for any type of content outside of holograms, you honestly don't need to level your Verina past level 50. And the reason for that is pretty simple. Verina's main buffs and the main reasons why you're running her in a team is so that you have access to first this buff from her inherent skill, Gift of Nature. This essentially is, whenever she uses pretty much any one of her abilities, she's going to increase the attack of your entire team by 20% for 20 seconds. This is a fantastic buff, and it's something that you want to have across pretty much every single rotation. And when you see all the different attacks that are actually able to trigger it, well, it's no surprise at all that this is one of the cornerstones of her kit. The next is her outro skill, which is going to go ahead, give a little bit of healing to somebody on the team, and then also amplify the entire team's damage by 15%, right? These 2 buffs combined are the main reason why you're putting her in your team. There's not much of a reason beyond that, because A, she does like no damage here. Her Forte circuit does no damage either. It only provides the healing, and that healing is typically used to trigger this. And all her liberation does is mark an enemy, provides some coordinated attacks, which is relevant for some units, but beyond that, it doesn't really deal any damage, and it doesn't heal that much either, especially if you don't have her built like me. And so with that in mind, Verina will function perfectly fine if she's just at level 50, and this is the only skill that she has leveled up. And that'll be the same for another healer on the list. They just need to be level 50, have this leveled up, and then also have a Fallacy of No Return plus a Rejuvenating Glow Echo set on them. Because what this is going to do, ladies and gentlemen, is, well, of course, right, we all know what Rejuvenating Glow does. It's going to provide her a healing bonus, and then 15% attack to the entire team for 30 seconds upon healing them. And that makes her total buffs to the entire team, well, 35% attack, as well as a 15% damage amp. And that is actually a lot of buffs, and that's why she is the #1 recommended pick. So why don't we just go ahead and take a look at what her rotation like and talk about some general overall tips for her gameplay next. So Verina is essentially going to have 2 rotations available depending on what type of weapon you have equipped on her. And this is why we haven't actually covered the weapon yet, because it is a little bit important. So we're just going to go ahead and demonstrate, right, a rotation and what it looks like when you don't necessarily have variation. And let's just make sure that we use a full 3-person team for this one. All right, so Verina's rotations are naturally going to be a lot slower if you don't have variation available. But don't worry, all is not lost. I'll show you all exactly what you need to do to make it, to make it stick. So you want to make sure that when you're starting off your TOA clear, that Verina is not actually the first character in your lineup. And it's going to be pretty easy to understand why. You're going to swap to her, spam your basic attacks until you get a Forte Circuit charge. Then you're going to skill, cast your Liberation, and then jump into the air until your Concerto bar is filled. Then you'll use your Echo skill, right? And then go to your other teammate and then go through their rotation. And we're just going to take this one really slow so I can show you all what happens at the end of a rotation. So, you're going to notice that my Jian's outro skill is ready. I am not going to use it on Verina. I'm going to instead use it on Mortefi, right? And then go back to Verina so I can do that exact rotation again. And now we're back onto our Mortefi. And wasn't that fast, ladies and gentlemen? That's one of the biggest strengths of this unit, is how fast she's actually able to generate her Concerto and go through her rotation. And you have noticed over there, right? I was able to get a full charge using a level 1 weapon. That is without using an ER weapon. We were using, ladies and gentlemen, this bad boy, a Fusion Accretion, which has an attack main stat. And because it gives 6 resonance energy upon casting its skill, well, we were able to get a full rotation in, using a bit more of a budget weapon. If you're looking for other options when it comes to gearing Verina, Call of the Abyss is another weapon that is available from exploring Renacita, and this thing will give you an energy regen substat. But the unfortunate thing is that, well, to get that substat, you're gonna have to level it up, and that, as you can see over here, leveling it up is kind of expensive. And so at a baseline, if your Verina is at least like 190 ER, 180, well, you could just use a Fusion Accretion, and if you have multiple copies of it, right, well, you could just syntonize it too. And what does syntonizing do? It actually increases the amount of ER that you're gonna get from the weapon when you activate the skill. So that's something to think about as well if you're looking for like the most budget ways ever. You got a bunch of copies of this thing and you're wondering what to do with them. That's something that could actually pan out a little bit for you there. The last thing that I'll say is that Verina only has one real build when it comes to her echoes. You probably saw all the stuff that I was running over here. I was running +0s because you don't really actually need substats on her 4 cost or her 1 cost. All you really want are 2 ER3 costs that are leveled up and taken to +25. And if you can get an ER sub on those, well, that's awesome, right? But even if you don't, you get at least 1 or 2 ER subs on your echoes, and that's like it. You don't really need to level these up that much. My Verina functions perfectly as she is in this state. Obviously, she doesn't heal that much because I haven't built her for that at all, but you could spend a little bit more to be able to actually bolster her healing output a lot more significantly. But the main things you need are just 2 ER3 costs, and then she'll function in that role perfectly fine. And now what I want to show all of you is how fast her rotation actually looks like when you have a 5-star, or really a 5-star weapon in disguise variation at R5. And you'll be able to see just how fast her rotation actually is. And we'll just use that same exact team. We'll amp it up though and actually play it at full speed so you all can see exactly what I'm talking about here. All right, so we're just gonna go in. And that's how fast it is. So now let's show what 2 rotations can look like in this team. Oh, I'm a little bit short on my ER over here, but you can kind of see, right, how fast you're actually able to go. And the answer is, well, pretty fast. And that's going to be our 3rd rotation over here. And that's just an example. of how it works, ladies and gentlemen. That's why this unit is so highly recommended for pretty much every single account and every single player. She operates on a complete budget. She works even with bad weapon options or lower quality ones. But when you give her a bunch of stuff that she needs to shine, like an R5 variation, holy crap, the character is absolutely insane. And the best thing that I would say about Verina is also the fact that her dupes for a standard unit are incredible. Her first one doesn't really do anything. It just increases her healing, which isn't the main reason why you're using her. But her second is fantastic because what it does is it grants you a massive amount of concerto energy and an additional charge on your Forte circuit. Your Forte circuit is why you're able to gain concerto so fast. Because what Verina does is when she jumps in the air and auto attacks, or does a basic attack, right? She actually consumes one charge of her Forte circuit photosynthesis energy. And so her skill usually only gives her one, but with this, her skill's gonna grant a second one and generate 10 more concerto. And guys, an R5 variation only gives 16. And so this thing is given a lot of concerto and even more ways to consume air attacks to gain even more concerto. So it is one of the best S2s in the game. So you can think about it this way. I'm horrifyingly unlucky because I haven't gotten it yet, but because I haven't gotten it, I can demonstrate to you what an S01 does. So it only gets better from here, ladies and gentlemen. Her rotation only gets faster, and that is kind of wild for a unit like this. So yeah, that's why Verina's gonna be up first. She's clearly the best value unit in the game, and when you can get her for free and then upgrade her significantly from losing 50/50s, well, she's a unit that you're happy to get the first copy of, and you're happy to get more copies of in the future. Now, let's move on to the next one, Sanhua. And there's a reason for that. Every single player gets Sanhua. At minimum S0, they get her for free. And I've done a lot of experimentation with this unit. I've tested out a lot of different builds, built her with damage and built her without damage. And one thing is clear. This is probably, budget-wise, the best sub-DPS unit in the game because she combines a bunch of characteristics. She's extremely fast in building concerto, and she has one of the lowest field times in the game, and she actually doesn't need to be built to deal damage to get her job done. Because essentially, what Sanhua has is a rotation on field that takes around 3 to 4 seconds. And with Overture, her rotation gets even shorter. And so when you focus on Sanhua essentially being a Moonlit Clouds only sort of unit, where their only goal is to go ahead, rotate through their kit really fast, and then give their outro skill to somebody, as well as the 22.5% attack buff and the 12% damage buff of the Moonlit Cloud set, well, even if the character that they're buffing can't actually use basic attacks, well, they could still end up working pretty fine. And for one example, I'm just gonna make sure that we actually have a, you're gonna be surprised by this team. We're gonna make sure we actually have a Gian team ready to actually showcase this one. Because you might be surprised at what this, about what this character is able to do. So, first things first, I'll just demonstrate to you all how Sanhua's rotation ends up being so ridiculously short. Let's get right on into it. And we're gonna demonstrate it with a Camellia team first. So the goal of Sanhua's rotation, and we'll make sure to use Verina too, the goal of Sanhua's rotation is to summon icicles and then detonate them using a heavy attack. And it's pretty easy to do this. So, first things first, what she does is she just presses her E, her R, holds down her heavy attack, and now her concerto is literally full. That was fast, wasn't it? We even tanked some hits too. A little bit rough seeing her drop so much HP, but that's what happens when you have +0 echoes. But what if we do something like this? I just used 2 intro skills at once. And I swapped during Sanhua's skill R so that I would not be vulnerable during that animation. I swapped over to another character. I swapped over to Verina so that we could do her rotation because she requires herself to be swapped onto to attack faster and gain that Forte circuit faster. This is what Verina looks like when you don't swap first. That's how long it takes her to do a Forte circuit attack. But when you swap to her, right, it takes that little time. So we're benefiting both characters' kits by doing that. Now, let's put it all together. I'm going to go on to Camellia. Get my rotation on Verina, right? Go over to Sanhua. Use my skill in R. Auto attack a little bit on Camellia for fun. And then go back to Sanhua. Use my Heron. And then go on to Camellia. And that's just an example, right, of how I can really speed up this team's rotations. Ooh, nice dodge. I'm missing every single crit, so don't look at this damage and think that my characters are unbuilt, okay? So great. Now I intro skill in onto Sanhua. Do everything we just did. And then we just begin a rotation anew. And you can see over here, right? Oh boy, they're getting faster. Yeah, because when it comes to Verina, your team's second rotation is typically actually one of your it's typically faster than your first one. Yep. And that's what this character is capable of. Or really, these two characters, when they're being put together. Some of the fastest rotations that currently exist in the game. So I kind of messed it up a little bit there. I swapped a little bit early. But you guys can see what I'm talking about. And that is why Sanhua is so strong. The main reason is that Sanhua is able to go ahead and with absolutely zero investment at all, ladies and gentlemen, Sanhua is able to be an intro outro skill bot that's applying all of Moonlit Cloud's buffs, the massive buffs from the Heron and the set itself, with essentially a cooldown of only 16 seconds. Because the main limiter that she has is using her skill and her liberation together and then detonating it with this heavy attack. And the ultimate, the liberation, is the only real limiter of it. So every 16 seconds, you're able to essentially get an outro skill that takes you about 2 seconds of field time to access. And the thing is, every person had this character at S0, but there's more. When she's at S6, she actually grants an additional 20% attack to the entire team. 10% for each glacier she breaks, and when she does her skill liberation detonation combo, she breaks 2 glaciers, or prisms. So that's an immediate 20% for 20 seconds. So that brings up her total buffs, not even counting her outro skill. That brings up her total buffs to 42.5% attack, and to 12% damage buff. And what that means, ladies and gentlemen, is that Sanhua can actually have some wild use cases outside of the traditional teams. Let's see what it looks like when we're using Sanhua with a non-basic attack damage dealer. Maybe with a Gion. Oh, we canceled her detonation, so it should be a little bit faster. We're taking a bit of a time loss here. All right, now we're on Scar. Okay, my Gion is almost dead. And you can see how fast these rotations can become. Yes, they're dealing less damage than maybe what we're used to. But this is why Sanhua is such a strong character. We're able to liberate almost exactly off cooldown. And while our rotations don't deal as much damage, we're getting so many of them a lot faster. And that's just an example of the stuff that you're able to do even when you're not matching up the typings. Because of course, right, Sanhua is a really, really, really good unit. And so, yeah, I would say when it comes to using her, of course, Jian is not going to be the recommended teammate. You probably want to run something like either, you know, maybe a Brandt, maybe a Camellia, maybe even a Havoc Rover, or even, of course, right, the classic, the Encore. So those are some better suggestions, but I just wanted to show what she can do in some fringe use cases. All right, but yeah, that's going to be Sanhua. We've gone through all the details when it comes to her. Now, let's move on to the next unit. And that one is going to be none other than Havoc Rover. Because boy, oh boy, are they one of the strongest free-to-play, free-to-obtain DPS units in gacha history, if we're frankly being honest. And that's because of a couple of things. Havoc Rover is a character that you get pretty much maxed out just from completing the main story. I think it's 1.0 all the way to some parts in 2.0, or maybe even 2.2. I'm not frankly sure. But once you get all that stuff going, you'll have this character at S6, and of course, you'll have the perfect weapon to go with them, Emerald of Genesis, just from playing the game as well. Because, well, when you get to UL 45, which is something that you can do in just a couple of weeks, you'll be able to claim a free copy of any 5-star weapon. And the #1 recommendation that can be made for any sort of person is that they pull Emerald of Genesis. And instead of using an Emerald of Genesis on the Sanhua, if you're super free to play, I suggest just sticking something like Overture on her, or just a lower budget weapon, and then instead slotting Emerald of Genesis on this bad boy. Because it gives nice critical stats, which is rare for standard weapons. It's also going to give ER, which is good for your uptime on your liberation. And, well, Havoc Rover has 2 resonant skills, and because of that, they'll be able to build up this attack buff across their rotation, and it's pretty good. So when it comes to what they're actually going to use, the stuff that you're going to run on them, it's pretty simple. You're just going to run a traditional Havoc Eclipse set, the one that gives you 10% Havoc damage, and then gives you more stacks of it as you use basic or heavy attacks, because Rover uses a lot of these in their main DPS rotation. And that's the main one that we're going to be covering today. They essentially have 2 states. One that's activated by going into a heavy attack, and that means that most of their intro rotation is spent using abilities to build up the Forte circuit that they need to actually activate this and gain access to their enhanced basic attacks. And then their liberation as well, it deals a lot of damage. And it deals even more damage when they're in their enhanced state. And so you'll see firsthand, you know, they've got some extra things like recovering resonance energy. They gain that 20% havoc damage bonus in the Dark Surge enhanced state, blah, blah, blah. All that good stuff. And the main thing is that their dupes, because you get all of them for free, are actually really, really strong. With the main one being, well, when they're also in that enhanced state that we just talked about, on top of getting 20% additional havoc damage and enhanced basic attacks, they also gain a crit rate boost to 25%. And so this Rover's crit rate is actually going to be 96 in combat, so they're never going to miss. Another bonus for playing Havoc Rover is the fact that they have their own customized echo. If Dreamless is used after Havoc Rover uses their Resonance Liberation, which deals a lot of damage, then this entire echo skill is going to deal 50% more damage. And as you can see from the motion values over here, it's about 600 something percent, almost 600% exactly. And 50% more, well, that makes this ability quite powerful. And the thing is, Havoc Rover is actually really good with the first 2 characters that we just talked about over here. Ladies and gentlemen, this is another incredibly strong free-to-play team, and it's something you are guaranteed to have as long as you use your selector on Verina. So let's just go ahead and see how it's going to function, what we're talking about over here exactly when it comes to these rotations. This is the most free-to-play team in the game. It doesn't really get much cheaper than this one. So we're going to be using the same exact builds that we just had on our Sanhua and our Verina. You know that those are incredibly budget, and we'll just see how they perform in the TOA. We're actually in the overdrive zone right now, so let's take a look at it. So with this team over here, what you're going to want to do is essentially start off with Rover's skill, then move over to Verina, get her whole rotation going, go over to Sanhua over here, then back to Rover a little bit for some attacks. And then you're going to activate their enhanced state on their forte. Try to get off 2 basic attack rotations. That can be a little bit rough if you're trying not to die like me. And then just keep cycling. Go back to Sanhua. Do this whole rotation. And with this intro skill, actually go back to Rover. And then you'll be able to sort of cycle through. Try to get off 2 more basic attack chains. And then just nuke again. And you're going to notice over here, right? The team is doing a decent amount of damage. This is the overdrive zone, so it's some of the most hard-hitting stuff in the game. And you're seeing over here, we're making pretty good time. And we're going to break him in time as well. Very nice. And we're just giving Rover 2 intro skills right now. And you're seeing over here, wow, this team is actually getting some very, very good overall performance. And we're just doing the same thing over and over at this point. And you're noticing that the team's rotation is actually going faster than the cooldown on my Verina Liberation can keep up. That's how fast this team's overall rotations are. And we're getting some big nukes off. I think that last one did 230%. And so that's what this character is able to do in single target. They're very, very good against a single boss that maybe has a tendency to have a bit of downtime in their attacks. But when you use the Rover in certain combat situations, namely, well, for example, this TOA where there are either multiple enemies or enemies that are really agile and dodge a lot of his attacks, he has really bad tracking. And so his DPS can straight up just fall off of a cliff if he's against enemies that are too mobile or enemies that are not grouped up. And that can be a bit of an issue for them. So yeah, that'll be that. That'll be the gameplay demo. But as you can see over here, their damage potential is quite high. They also have one last bit of power that's actually unlocked when you do something like pull a limited weapon. And that limited weapon is actually going to be Chang Li's, because Blazing Brilliance, ladies and gentlemen, is actually probably the best in slot for this unit, because it's quite simple. Rover, when you go ahead and get their S6, right, which is free, they gain 25% crit rate. And that means that by putting on Chang Li's weapon, which has a crit damage main stat, I'm able to run what is essentially 47% crit rate that goes up to 72 because of his S6. And that means, right, I'm running a crit damage weapon alongside a crit damage forecast. And when I have like a full build and everything's kind of like set up and ready to go, this can deal a lot of damage. Probably some of the most damage in the game. And if you pair this up, you pair up this combo, you replace Verina with Shorekeeper, then that crit rate becomes like 84. And so you get Shorekeeper, you get Blazing Brilliance. Well, we'll just see firsthand how the damage is looking, how much different it actually is. When we go back into the overdrive zone, we run this build, and we just see how it does, ladies and gentlemen. Let's give the Blazing Brilliance Rover and Shorekeeper a bit of a try. A little bit awkward that they flew all the way out there, but it shouldn't be that big of a deal. And let's see this nuke. And that did about 241. So you can see over here, right? The damage can be really high, and the rotation time is still quite fast. Especially when you get to your second and third ones on Shorekeeper. And that's just an example of how you can upgrade Rover even further as you're going through and you're trying to build out their full potential. You've even got some limited 5-star weapon options for the free-to-play unit for you to reach like that next tier of DPS. So that's going to be Havoc Rover. Now let's move on to our next unit. And this one's going to be a little bit more Wee-Wah favored. You might have noticed a bit of a shift in the team lineup, and that's because we've taken out Sanhua and we've instead put in a character like Yangyang. And Yangyang is an example of one of the most multi-rolled characters, at least in my opinion, in the game currently. And this is the thing. Yangyang is a unit that generates concerto really fast. She's not as fast as Sanhua though, and she requires a little bit more prep and a little bit more thinking about how you're rotating through her kit to be able to realize a lot of her benefits. And so first things first, I think we need to talk about the build and what she's actually going to be using. Yangyang is going to be best on a copy of Moonlit Clouds. She is, at her core, a sub-DPS unit with what her outro skill and everything do. What she does, right, is she deals a moderate amount of damage on field. She recovers stamina for the team, gains a little bit of an arrow damage bonus, and with her outro skill, she actually recovers energy for the on-field character. She actually doesn't give any damage bonuses. The only damage bonus that she actually has in her kit is unlocked when she's S6, and that, when she uses her Forte Circuit attack, which is in the air, she gives 20% attack to the entire team. And so she is, without a doubt, the most general buffer in the game in that she will literally work with every single character. But because she doesn't have an outro skill like Sanhua, which gives 38% amp, she's not necessarily one that's like the best in slot for every team. But this is the thing. She makes Havoc Rover really actually usable against groups. Because, well, she provides grouping, damage boosts, grouping, and a relatively fast rotation. Unlike Sanhua, though, Yangyang is actually a unit that can make use of additional investment. One of the main ways to naturally invest in her, right, is to give her some echoes that don't suck. And I've got like a couple of arrow damage ones that are, you know, completely usable. And so that's what we're going to end up using. You're going to see over here, her stat profile doesn't look that good. Well, it's not going to look that great until I start putting some actual equipment on her. And so I would say the main one that we'll be thinking about is actually just we'll put on Emerald of Genesis on her. And then for Rover, we'll put on a copy of... We'll just put on Camellia Signature, which is going to give them some damage boost, but nothing too significant. It's mainly so that I can keep their crit rate relatively high. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we've got Infinite Torrents over here in Whimpering Wastes, and this is where we're going to be trying out the Yangyang and the Havoc Rover Verina composition. And so don't worry at all what I'm posting on the first side. You'll see what's going on in a little bit. Unfortunately, in Whimpering Wastes, you do have to clear the first side with one team before being able to use the other. And so we'll just skip ahead, but we'll be using the most free-to-play team we can possibly have for Havoc Rover over here, at least for this game mode, and also accompany that with this Plunderer's Captain Seal, which is a token that's consistently available every single reset and doesn't really depend on the state of your team to be able to activate, much like the gold tokens that are pretty much found in every reset. And so with that, I'll see you once we get to actually playing this Havoc Rover team in a bit. All right, ladies and gentlemen, now that we're on the other side, well, it's time for us to give this team a bit of a try. We're gonna have one of the most free-to-play lineups possible for Whimpering Wastes, and we'll show off why Yangyang is a pretty decent investment as well with this one. So, very similar to the TOA, right? We just want to make sure that we are rotating through the team, casting some stuff on Yangyang as well, right? So that when she comes in, she's able to deal a good bit of damage. And then Rover is also able to do their transformation and then get their big hits off. Because that, ladies and gentlemen, just deleted about 2 waves. And unfortunately, right, our Yangyang kind of just got her rotation a little bit too fast. So we have to spend a little bit of extra time on her. And this is something you can do. Oh, unfortunate. I was going to show you a bit of a cool time slowdown tech you can do to try to hit more enemies. Unfortunately, that was not really possible for us.
Let the winds roar. Life is in everything.
So sometimes you do want to make sure that the enemies are a little bit more grouped. You can just swap over to Yangyang real fast, right? Because one nice thing about Yangyang, ladies and gentlemen, is that she doesn't actually have any outro skill that can cause you, like, some issues. And we definitely could get a better overall score with this one. We had a bit of a mishap halfway through our clear. But hopefully, right, you're able to see where the potential of this team is, especially when... And you see how over there I was able to pause and then attack all of these enemies at once? Yeah, when you only need to get about 2250 on one side to be able to clear, we essentially get it here. We were just a couple of points off. You need 2250 on each side to be able to get a full clear. And that's just me trying it out with Plunderers, messing up the rotation partway through, not getting double ultimates, which is like the Havoc Rover tech, but all you need to do is just make sure your enemies are grouped up, one-shot all of them with Havoc Rover, press tab while that animation is playing, and then his liberation will actually hit the second wave. We did that once, but if you can get that more consistently, which is really easy with Yangyang grouping, well, Whimpering Waste gets a lot easier. And this is just what we get raw dogging it on our first try. So yeah, that's just something to keep in mind as you're going throughout your clears when you're trying out the new endgame modes, because Yangyang, ladies and gentlemen, she is free. And when you get her as 6, she gives a lot more damage to the team with that 20% attack, and that's kind of like it. She's a really good Whimpering Waste character, and getting performance like this, which we can definitely improve on if we just grinded out the rotations a little bit more, when 4500 is all you need, ladies and gentlemen, to get an S and unlock all of the Astra rewards at the end, it can't be that much of a problem. So yeah, that will be our Yangyang portion. Keep in mind that she is usable in the TOA, but you might find that your damage is a little bit lacking if you're using more free-to-play options with Yangyang as the DPS or as the sub DPS without that lack of buffing outro skill. So do keep in mind she's mainly a pick for Whimpering Waste if you're going to use her with free-to-play DPS options. So now let's move on to our final pick. Our final pick for some of the must builds is actually going to be Baizhi. And the reason for that isn't because Baizhi is like the strongest character ever. It's actually because you can invest almost nothing into her and still get some decent results. Remember how at the start of the guide I was talking about how Verina only needed to be level 50? It's the same exact case for Baizhi. You get her to level 50. You spend about 100 wave plates getting the mats you need to level her up. You keep everything at skill level 1, and she'll still be able to do her job because she has the same 15% amplification that Verina and Shorekeeper do. And the only negative about her is that her attack buff is 5% less than Verina. She obviously has some issues with her rotation timing, but we'll actually get into how you can mitigate a lot of those throughout your clears. So with that, now let's go ahead and talk about some of the additional benefits that she has. She has a revive that's actually better than other units. This is actually better than Verina's. It just gives them 100% max HP. And she does have a bit of a bonus to Glacio damage. So if you have a Glacio DPS like a Carlotta and you're looking to find a support and you don't have Shorekeeper, Baizhi actually might be the one. The main reason for why you want to use this unit is that A, she gets the job done done at just level 50 with minimum investment. And B, you don't have Shorekeeper yet. And the thing about Baizhi is that with her set, you can actually just give her the set that you will eventually put on your Shorekeeper, and she'll operate just fine. And so as you're prepping to pull Shorekeeper, which you probably should if you plan on, you know, advancing pretty far in the game, you can just pre-build your Baizhi with your Shorekeeper echoes. A crit damage on here, ER on the 3 costs, a spectral damage as well for fun if you're feeling like it, and then HP 1 costs. And then try to get ER on every piece. Because, well, Baizhi also scales off of HP. And the thing is, like as we're about to see over here, her rotation isn't as bad as a lot of people might be saying. And we'll just be using some pretty consistently meta teams for this lineup over here. Teams that you traditionally do see in the TOA, but you just never really think to put Baizhi in. And this first one is, of course, going to be Gian Mortefi team. We'll see how this team does. With this Baizhi over here at level 50, functionally doing almost nothing. And first things first, you want to make sure that Baizhi is first in the team lineup with the rotation that we'll be showing you. So this is a sample rotation with this team. You'll see what's happening here. So when the boss comes in, you just want to attack 4 times with Baizhi. Use her skill. Swap over to the other person. Come back, and then cancel her entry into animation with her liberation. And then proceed with the team rotation as normal. That was done a little bit slow. Now let's do it as fast as possible with Baizhi.
Not bad, huh? Verity shines.
And as you can see, we already got it.
Burn to ashes. Testing out. Ready, proof out. Fear no more. I can take it.
And as you can see here, our damage is actually quite good.
Endless reverberation.
Fury boil. Break. Silence. Testing out. You're wide open. Unstoppable. Fury boil. Inferno.
And getting some solid rotations over here. Unfortunately, Scar is a little bit evasive right now. It happens. Yeah, you get it. You get it. That's how Baizhi's gonna work. She does have a little bit of clunk in her trunk, as they would say. She is definitely not as smooth as Verina. You can get messed up trying to order her rotations compared to other teams, but there are some optimizations you can make for her. And at the end of the day, right, you're building Baizhi because you don't have Shorekeeper yet. And she will serve as a sub-in even with minimal investment and at level 50. And remember, she's kind of just the stopgap until you start getting some better supports, but you can actually use her for quite a long time. So that's going to be our entire overview. That's going to be every single unit that I have on my must build list. And what you're going to notice about all of these units is that for units like Verina, the Yangyangs, the Sanhuas, etc., you can actually afford to keep these at lower levels and lower overall investment. All the footage that you saw today, these supports, these sub DPSs, basically everyone except Havoc Rover was either under-leveled or had very, very, very low investment. And the thing is, Yangyang is kind of like the only exception where you do want her slightly built for Whimpering Waste to be able to deal her own chip damage. But Rover's really the only one that requires a lot of investment over here. And one thing you have to realize is that these are free-to-play and budget must-builds. And when you're a free-to-play player, that doesn't mean that you're a no-pull player. We're giving you a solid team for TOA and giving you a solid team for Whimpering Waste as well. And when you're getting around 80, 90, 100 something pulls a patch in this game, well, you can afford to pull on the limited banner once in a while. And so the idea is that with this guide, with this overview, you should be able to build one team for both game modes, and surely your pulls on the other side will be able to suffice for whatever other teams you're going to need for those game modes. And if there's a priority for how I would list out the build order for these units, it would probably be Verina first, then a Havoc Rover, then you get to Sanhua, then Yangyang after that, and you've got your 2 teams for TOA and Whimpering Wastes. Then you start building your Baizhi last to get ready for the other team. Verina is a much stronger support than Baizhi. And you pair your Verina with your weaker DPS, Havoc Rover, and you'll pair Baizhi with whoever you end up getting from the limited banner, right? It could be a Gian, it could be a Carlotta, it could be a Camellia. Whoever you end up pulling on the DPS side, put your Baizhi with them, and let that stronger DPS, who's stronger than Havoc Rover, carry the second team. And that'll be the most efficient way for you to be able to get all the resources possible from all of these different time-gated endgame modes. Because one thing that sucks is not being able to clear or missing out on the time-limited Astrite because you decided to raise your Verina to level 90 or your Baizhi to level 90 instead of doing the right thing and raising that second DPS to level 90 instead, and like splitting the investment a little bit more from there to be able to clear all the multi-team content. So yeah, that'll be our overview. Hopefully if it was helpful, let me know what you all think. Peace.